Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take your notes, your sources, and all that curiosity and turn it into the knowledge you're looking for. And today, we are digging into a real musical phenomenon that, well, almost nobody heard the first time around. The D.I.T. band.
This is maybe the most satisfying kind of music history deep dive you can do. Because we're talking about Destiny and Time, or D.I.T., this obscure, really grassroots R&B and funk group from the 80s.
Right.
And like so many of these indie groups, they really should have just been lost to history. But they managed to pull off the ultimate modern success story, a huge second life decades later, all because of some smart business moves and, the surprising world of TV licensing.
It's that perfect aha moment for anyone who just loves finding those hidden gems. And our source stack for this is fascinating. It's a mix of biographical details, discography data from places like Spotify and Discogs, and then the modern stuff, the cultural breadcrumbs that let us trace exactly how a TV show brought their career back to life.
Yeah, so our mission today is really to trace that whole journey. We want to understand how a true DIY funk operation, starting out in Baltimore back in the early 70s, could hold on to their own music long enough for their biggest track from 1983 to become a global streaming hit, like 40 years later.
It's a masterclass in independent control.
He really is.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to rewind all the way back to 1972. Before they were the D.I.T. band, the story starts in the most classic place you can imagine.
The basement.
A basement, exactly. A high school friendship in a family basement. Specifically, the bassist Wayne Watts' family basement in Baltimore.
And that's really the starting point for everything. It was Watts and his best friend, John Shavers, who played trumpet. They were the core. And they pretty quickly brought in Michael Thompson on keys and lead vocals, Sharon Reed on guitar, who later became Sharon Watts, and Tony Yorkshire on drums.
And they started with this, much grander name, Destiny and Time. They were playing around with funk and pop, a little disco, before they finally just shortened it to D.I.T. around 1979. But what's so important here isn't just the music, which they openly modeled after huge bands like Earth, Wind and Fire and, Prince.
The biggest acts of the era?
But their absolute commitment to doing it all themselves. Self-production.
That commitment is the whole reason we're talking about them. I mean, they were not waiting around for some record label to discover them. They recorded all their own music, even music for their friends, right there in Watts' basement. And the key piece of gear was a Teak 2340.
A 4-track recorder. That's a fascinating technical constraint, isn't it? For listeners who maybe aren't familiar with that older tech, what does recording on a Teak 2340 tell us about the sound of those early tracks?
Oh, it tells you everything. It explains that raw, dense energy. A 4-track machine limits you. I mean, dramatically. You only have 4 channels to work with. So if you want drums, bass, guitar, keys, vocals, you have to use a technique called bouncing tracks.
So you're mixing, 3 tracks down onto the 4th one to free up space?
Exactly. You mix 3 down, which frees up the other 3 channels, but that mix is permanent. You are committed.
Wow. No going back.
No undo button. It forces you to make these really definitive decisions early, and it often results in this slightly rougher, compressed, but super energetic sound. It just screams late 70s indie production.
And this whole do-it-yourself thing wasn't just about the recording. It was about distribution, too. They released all these tracks on their own label, which might be the single most important detail in their whole story. Evergreen Records.
Evergreen Records is the foundation of this entire deep dive. They controlled their masters, their publishing, everything from day one. And that one business move, owning it all, is why they could license the track decades later without fighting some defunct major label.
And that label is still active today.
Still active. Just incredible long-term thinking.
So what were some of those early foundational tracks they put out on Evergreen? The ones that really set their funk and disco sound?
The early ones were tracks like Dance, Visions, Long Gone, Gotta Get It Together, and Let's Start Dancin'. You can hear them just establishing their groove, aiming right for the dance floor, very much in that Earth, Wind and Fire vein.
Okay, so let's jump into their most active time, the early 80s. The sources show the lineup wasn't static, things were changing. What happened?
Well, the biggest shift was when the original trumpet player, John Shavers, left, but D.I.T. was smart about it. They brought in new talent to broaden their sound. Rhonda Delarimore and Floyd Pinkney.
Okay.
Delarimore was a multi-threat. She shared vocals and keyboard duties with Michael Thompson. And then Pinkney came in and replaced Shavers on trumpet, so they kept that crucial horn section sound.
And it was this version of the band that became the most prolific Right. They put out most of their music library.
Yeah.
But more importantly, this was the lineup that was determined to get out of the basement and actually hit the road.
Right. Their independence wasn't just local anymore. In 1982, they funded and organized a proper West Coast tour. I mean, this wasn't just playing clubs around Baltimore. They were going across Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, all the way to California.
That sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
But also really ambitious. What does that 1982 tour tell you about their determination? Especially since they were running it all through their own little label.
It tells you they were living that grassroots dream. I mean, they were booking the venues themselves, hauling their own gear, selling their own records and merch out of a van, probably. Just think about the logistics of that, moving a whole band across the country with no major label support. They were betting on themselves.
And the big payoff of all that hard work, that touring, was the single that would eventually define their entire legacy.
Yes. While they were still on that West Coast tour, in 1983, they released the track, You Bring Out the Best in Me. On the flip side was an instrumental funk jam called Hoo Jam. This was D.I.T. at their absolute peak. It just perfectly captured that bright, optimistic 80s R&B sound.
But that peak was, well, relatively short. We know that after that song came out, their activity started to slow down pretty significantly around 1985. So why would a band that had found this great sound, pulled off this huge indie tour, why would they start to fade right after releasing their biggest song?
It's a really common story for that specific moment in music history. The mid-'80s music scene just shifted, and it shifted aggressively. Funk and R&B were getting super synthesized and polished, and that raw, analog-style D.I.T. had perfected was starting to feel a little dated.
And this is also when hip-hop starts to explode, right?
Precisely. Commercial hip-hop and rap are on the rise. So the market for a grassroots touring R&B band was just getting squeezed from all sides. The fact they even made it to 85 with a consistent final lineup, Wayne and Sharon Watts, Michael Thompson, Johnny Shaw, and Steve Roybal, is pretty remarkable. But the moment for their sound had passed, or well, temporarily passed.
And for decades, that's where the story should have ended. They were just this cool underground relic of Baltimore funk. But thanks to the power of intellectual property, it didn't end there. Jump forward 30 years, and the story gets a second act in the world of prestige television. This is the payoff.
This is the payoff. It's a perfect case study in how owning your own work translates into longevity. That 1983 single, You Bring Out the Best in Me, it didn't just get rediscovered. It became valuable. It was authentic, period-accurate audio that wasn't overplayed and wasn't going to cost a fortune to license from a major label.
And we know the exact moment, the specific cultural placement that kicked this all off. It was featured prominently in Season 3, Episode 6 of FX's show Snowfall. The episode was called Confessions.
And that placement in Snowfall is the whole key to their modern exposure. That show is set during the rise of the crack epidemic in 1980s LA, and it is meticulously curated for its soundtrack. So when they use a track like You Bring Out the Best in Me, it's not just background noise. They're cementing the atmosphere of the early 80s, that optimism that existed right before everything changed. D.I.T. provided the literal sound of that moment.
And the numbers don't lie. You can track the impact directly. If they were obscure in 1983, they are definitely not now. On Spotify, they have over 2,400 monthly listeners.
Which is incredible.
For a band that recorded on a 4-track 40 years ago with almost no radio play, that's just remarkable, sustained success.
It's proof that licensing is the new radio. And look at the streams for just that one song. You Bring Out the Best in Me has over 134,000 streams. Then there's the Evergreen Studios edit, which shows they're actively re-releasing the music. That has another 50,000 plus. It's all driven by that placement.
What's really cool is how the theme of the track still resonates. The title, You Bring Out the Best in Me, it just taps into this universal idea that's as relevant today as it was in the 80s.
Oh, it's a brilliant cultural connector. We saw that phrase or, variations of the best of me pop up all over the source material. You see it in these really emotional contexts on Reddit, like on Harlove or Rask Women Over 30, when people are talking about their relationships. And then you see it on places like Room Motivation.
So they sort of accidentally landed on this thematic gold mine. It's got the same kind of feeling as, like, Anita Baker's Giving You the Best That I Got.
Exactly. The song's structure is classic. The lyric is fundamentally hopeful. And that optimism, combined with being placed in a nostalgic TV show, creates the perfect storm for modern discovery. Listeners want authentic sounds that feel real, and D.I.T. delivers this perfectly preserved slice of 1983.
And Spotify gets it. They're not treated like some historical curiosity. They're grouped in playlists like OC Funk and 80s Groove with artists like Ozone and Midnight Express. New listeners are finding them as part of the canon.
And this revival isn't an accident. It's being actively managed. The fact that Evergreen Records, the label they built in that basement, is still operating just proves their original business model worked. They put out the You Bring Out the Best in Me single again in 2019 to ride the snowfall wave.
And they're not even stopping there. The sources show Evergreen released a live single, Dance, Get Up on the Floor, live in 2025. This isn't just passive income. This is an active label building on that foundation.
It's the ultimate validation of that independent vision. They own their masters, control their publishing, and decades later, they're reaping the rewards because the industry finally caught up to their sound through licensing.
So to bring it all back together, we've traced the entire arc of Destiny in time. From Wayne Watts' Baltimore basement with the Teak 2340 to that intense 1982 West Coast tour, through the quiet years of the mid-'80s, and then this explosive resurrection as a soundtrack staple.
Yeah, their story just reflects the, I guess, unpredictable power of music that's made independently and preserved so carefully. They lived the dream, modeled their sound after Prince and Earth, Wind and Fire and built a business around it. So if the ultimate sign of success is creating a timeless song that becomes this cultural benchmark, what does it say about the modern music landscape that an underground R&B group's biggest hit became globally recognized not in the 80s, but only after it was chosen to soundtrack a story about the 80s?
A perfect thought to leave you with. We will catch you on the next Deep Dive.